Higgins. She represents, and also recording is going to be in progress. We just want to make sure we save these words. She is the representative of the 4th District of Worcester, and she actually graduated from UMass Amherst with a degree in political science, and she has obtained her law degree from the Northeastern University School of Law. A couple of pieces of legislation that she's filed that relate to affordable higher education is an act to guarantee debt-free public higher education and an act to support educational opportunity for all. So thank you for being here, Representative Natalie Higgins, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks for having me. I am super excited for all of you taking time out of your Saturday to talk about debt-free higher education, something I talk about every single day. So when I was invited, I was asked just to talk about kind of my experience as a legislator. I also want to talk about how I became a legislator, because for any of you who are thinking about running for office, that's sometimes a helpful part of how I got here from UMass. So I grew up in the district that I represent. It's the 4th Worcester district is just the city of Leominster. For any of you who are from Massachusetts, you probably know where Leominster is. If you don't, it's about 30 minutes north of Worcester, right in the middle of North Central Mass. And typical kid in a gateway city. My dad dropped out of high school in the 10th grade, and my mom was kind of pushed very heavily towards like, college isn't for you, like take these business courses in high school. So they were really determined to make sure that their kids had a shot at going to college. And lucky for me, I came up with the standardized testing and MCAS, and I did really well on standardized testing. So they were like, this is great. She's our ticket to the middle class. She's going to be fine. She's going to go to college. It's going to be awesome. And I got into a lot of colleges, and we had no idea how much they actually cost. But I got this thing called a John and Abigail Adams Scholarship. They do a better job at telling you what it is. But when I got there, it was like free tuition at UMass. I was like, I'm going to UMass for free. This is great. And then we got a bill for $15,000 on the back end being like, what are these fees? Like, what is all this other stuff? And so for me, that was the first time that I realized like something's up. We're not paying for public higher education in the way that I thought we did. We're Massachusetts. We're the state that like prides ourselves on having a highly educated workforce. Why aren't we making these investments in public higher ed? I loved my experience at UMass. I wasn't involved with SEPA, but a lot of my friends were. I worked with the Center for Women in Community and trained as a rape crisis counselor, and that's where I did my policy work. So my senior year, my senior thesis was on passing the 250-AD harassment prevention order. So up until 2009 in Massachusetts, you couldn't get a restraining order if you didn't have an intimate partner relationship with your perpetrator. That's a whole lot of survivors who didn't qualify for a restraining order. What blew my mind even more was that this wasn't the first time that they tried to fill the gap in the law. They had introduced this for the 5th time. So for 10 years, advocates had been going to the State House and saying, hey, a whole lot of survivors don't have access to this important protection. You got to give it to them. And it would always make progress. It would get through committee. It would get pretty far, and then it would stall somewhere, and it wouldn't get over the finish line. And when I came in, it was the first time that they worked with the rape crisis centers to really have local survivors and advocates do meetings with legislators in their district and just say, I don't feel safe going out in our community and being out without this protection. Like, I need you to protect me. And it worked, right? Like seeing that grassroots advocacy that we focused on all 200 legislative districts, we finally got it through. And fast forward, the 250-AD order has turned 10 years old, and we're actually working with Rep. Wynn on updates to it. So it's really amazing to have been able to work on pushing that to become law, now being in the legislature and getting to work on the updates to make sure that it's still fulfilling all of its intent. So when I graduated from UMass Amherst, it was 2009. It was the middle of an economic crisis that pales in comparison to what we're in right now. And it was really hard to find a job. And I started volunteering at our local rape crisis center. And about 8 months in, the teen counselor position opened up. And that's, I was able to convince them to hire me. And I got that job. And I worked doing prevention education in 45 cities and towns across Central Mass. And counseling teen survivors of sexual violence. By far the hardest job I will ever have. There was a whole lot more put on me at like 21 and 22 than even today, to be able to have those conversations with those groups of people, and be that support for my teen survivors. But I saw a lot of gaps in the law. Like, the legal process was not a place where my teens were getting healing or closure. It was re-traumatizing. And we had these laws that were supposed to protect our community, and they weren't working. And so I had always wanted to go to law school. For a kid whose parents wanted her to be the first in her family to go to college, right? It's like law school or medical school is the way you prove that, like, you made it as a family. So I can't handle blood really well. So law school it was. But that really solidified, like, why did I want to go to law school, and what did I want to explore? And I had the opportunity to go to Northeastern, which has a co-op program. So I got to do 4 experiential learning programs while I was there. So I worked with Governor Patrick's administration, with the Governor's Council to Address Sexual and Domestic Violence, doing a lot of the work I was already doing around protections for youth. And then I worked with the Elder Law Unit and the Juvenile Court in Worcester. And I traveled to India and worked with the Human Rights Law Network in Delhi on the Reproductive Justice Unit, mostly looking at homelessness issues. All amazing experiences. Was getting ready to sit for the bar, saw a job for Phenom to be their first executive director. If you're not familiar with Phenom, it's the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts. You should be familiar with it because it was founded at UMass. And they were looking for someone with a master's preferred. And I said, okay, cool. Like, well, I've got this law degree. Like, I think that's equivalent, right? Like, let's see what they say. And eventually I got an interview, and I got the job to run the organization. And I think a lot of the reason I got the job was because I was a product of UMass Amherst. And I talk often, the high water mark for state funding was the year I was born, 1988. In 1988, a Mass grant would cover the tuition and fees, and then some. And then you'd get your Pell Grant on top of that at UMass. And over that time, we've gone from it kind of covering completely to the Mass grant covers only what is it? Only 10% of the cost, the total cost of attending UMass. So we've made decisions, right, to drive up the cost of what it actually costs to go to public higher ed, and then drive down the aid that's available. And it's made it really hard for families like mine to be able to make that decision to send kids to college, right? Like, you might want to just get a job rather than taking on all that student debt. And we've come a long way in talking about this, because when I was executive director of Phenom, I would hear from the higher ed chair, like, Natalie, you're telling the wrong message. Don't talk about student debt. What, you're taking out $30,000 in student debt to get a bachelor's degree? It's worth it. You'll make the money back. I was like, but you didn't have to, right? Like, your generation didn't have to. My parents' generation, if they had access to college, like, could go and like work a summer job and pay for it. Now, just to cover your tuition and fees, you have to work 30 hours, more than 30 hours a week. Like, you can't be a good student. You can't excel. And we deserve that investment that generations before us got. So I loved working for Phenom. It was an amazing opportunity to organize on 29 public college campuses across the state. I'm so excited that Timmy is taking over as the lead, and just, Phenom. The only thing that's wrong with Phenom is we apparently love UMass Amherst a lot, because the 3 executive directors are all UMass Amherst graduates. So, so we might have to break that trend after Timmy, but it says something about the organizing that you guys are doing here at UMass. And so I was working with Phenom for about 2.5 years, when in February of 2016, my predecessor, who held the seat before me, announced in the paper, kind of as a surprise to everyone, that he wasn't going to be seeking re-election. It's kind of late in the election cycle to do that. Like, he had to pull papers, and he kind of had to like make a decision one way or another. So I called my parents and my then boyfriend of 8 months and said, hey, I think I'm running for state rep. Will you support me? And they said, sure. And I was like, will you help? And they were like, lawn signs? Like, how do we run for office? And I was like, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. So I did a boot camp that helps train Democratic women to run for office. 3 of them did a boot camp called Mass Alliance that trains people to run progressive grassroots campaigns. and we worked our butts off in this gateway city that traditionally elected more conservative Democrats. We're known as a purple district. People forget that there's more conservative parts of Massachusetts, definitely from one of them. And I ran as a progressive, saying like, I'm a progressive because I grew up in this community and we all have the same shared values, and I want government to work for people. That there's a lot of distrust in government, and I saw a lot of friends and family being drawn to Donald Trump because they wanted someone who was like an outsider, who hadn't been in the system, who was going to like shake things up. That was a big draw in 2016. And I had a lot of people who were supporting me and supporting Donald Trump, and had to be like, our policies are very different. Like, can we like break that down? We're very different people, but that gives me a lot of hope. And so we won. I was running, my primary was against a 20-year sitting city councilor who is the city council president and runs the festival that we're known for in Leominster, the Johnny Appleseed Festival. You guys don't know, Leominster is the birthplace of Johnny Appleseed, so one of our claims to fame. That and pink lawn flamingos and Tupperware. So like, we're great, even though people don't know how to pronounce us or know where we are. Great claims to fame. We usually say, you're welcome or we're sorry, depending on how you feel about like pink lawn flamingos. And so in my primary, it was definitely an uphill battle. I was a new candidate. People, when I would answer, I was 27 when I was running, people would be like, are you old enough to run? I walked around with literally my resume on like a flyer being like, can you imagine? I did all of these things by the time I was 27. Could you imagine what I could do for Leominster if I worked for you full time? And that worked for us. And I won my primary by 38 votes. I never, ever want to do that again. But I tell it all the time because your votes really matter, and they matter more in those local races. So folks who feel frustrated at the national scene and feel like their votes don't matter for president, they really matter for state rep. They really matter for city council or town council. They really matter for school committee, because just a few dozen votes could really flip a seat. And so uh, um, I'm really thankful for Leominster taking a chance on me, and I'm headed into my third term where we've been working on higher ed issues, and really been thankful to partner with Phenom and continue that work, trying to figure out how do we make the inside-outside strategy work really well and cohesively together so that I can be having conversations with my 159 colleagues. There's 160 state reps. And I will say they're not totally sold that higher education needs to be free, right? Like we've got a battle to win. Do I think voters want higher education to be public higher ed to be free? Yeah, like we won that battle. Like it has dramatically changed over the last 10 years that I've been working on this issue, especially in Massachusetts. We got to figure out how to pay for it. And that's the other big conversation. So there's a few things that we've done. We've done major tax cuts since the 90s that wiped out about $3.5 billion a year from our budget. And you see that in the quality of our schools, our roads. You've seen kind of that austerity come into play in how we talk about the budget every year. The other piece is there's a whole lot of folks who, if you have a lot of money, you can figure out where to put it, right? And get a lot of tax benefits for it. One of those places is private endowments at private universities. So I'm really excited to work with Rep. Christine Barber and take on a bill that Rep. Provo, who just left the legislature, retired from the legislature, was taking on, which is an endowment tax. And so it's a 2.5% tax on endowments in excess of $1 billion. It would raise $1.6 billion a year. That would wipe out tuition and fees at all of our 29 public colleges and universities every year. Like that would just wipe out tuition and fees and make it free. The other piece of the debt-free bill that I have with Jamie Eldridge would add for lowest income students who aren't necessarily Pell recipients, but meet those income thresholds for Pell, cover your cost of living is calculated by your college or university. We know that that's not enough. It's somewhere between like $12,000 and $14,000 a year. That doesn't cover housing, but it makes a good dent into that cost. And then you would hopefully get help applying for Pell Grant and Mass Grant if you qualify for it. And that would get a better chance of us helping low income families send their kids to college full time rather than part time, which is what we're seeing a lot at our community colleges. Just taking a lot longer. It's costing a whole lot more. And then we have other students who decide 2 or 3 years in, like, I can't afford to continue to take on this debt, and dropping out, and then having put in that time and that energy and that learning, but not getting the degree. And so trying to figure out how do we have those conversations. But it's so important that you were all talking and building relationships with your legislators. Do you know who your state rep and your state senator are if you're Massachusetts residents? Can you drop it in the chat? And if you don't, can you drop your town or city, and I will look it up for you before we leave? Because it's really important you know us, especially during COVID. We don't hear from constituents as much. I moved my office hours. I have them twice a week, Monday nights and Friday mornings. I move them online, but people are really focused on COVID, right? Like, they're not checking in the way that they were before. And I'm so glad that some of you know who they are. I'm assuming this is going to be like a pretty good crowd to know who your reps are. But and it looks like you've got some folks who are big fans of public higher ed. So the other good thing in Massachusetts, when you think about organizing around public higher ed, more than half of the legislature has their educational background in a public institution. That is very unique to Massachusetts, and something that we haven't quite wielded as much as we could. And then one of the things that Timmy and I are trying to figure out with Phenom, and that I tried to figure out with Zach before him, is how many staff. There are so many staff in the building, which often are gatekeepers to the legislators who graduated from a public institution. So trying to make sure that we're having those conversations and building those relationships even at the staff level is really important. I think that's what I was asked to talk about, but I would love to answer any questions if anyone has questions. And I hope that was helpful. I'm excited that you guys are doing a whole week. I think that this is important to like spread out the ways that people can check in, especially because we're juggling so many things right now with the pandemic.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative Higgins. Thank you for sharing your story and how you got to where you are, and also for emphasizing how important it is to be involved in politics, especially in local politics. I think a lot of students don't really know how powerful their voices can be, and how much power they hold as constituents. So thank you for bringing that up. And if anyone has questions, we can open it up, but if not, we can move on to our next speaker. All right. Our next speaker is Timmy Sullivan, the Executive Director of Phenom, the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, Representative Higgins' successor. He was a previous Student Government Association president, graduated from UMass. And take it away, Timmy. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Timmy Sullivan. Pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm really excited to be joining you all today. SEPA has an especially warm place in my heart as an organization that I spent many years with on campus. So this is really incredible to see all of the student leaders who are now running that organization be able to pull something like this off on an issue that is really near and dear to my heart. As you can tell, now that I work at Phenom, the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, I'm continuing some of the work that I was doing on campus with SEPA and the SGA, working at Phenom. You know, we are an organization that pulls together stakeholders in public higher ed. So this is students like yourselves. This is faculty at the 29 public campuses across the Commonwealth. These are community leaders, labor leaders, state legislators like Representative Higgins, who are our allies in the State House, to come together and win a free public college and a debt-free future for students. This is a basic right that everyone deserves. You know, if you went to public school in Massachusetts, like myself, you know that it didn't cost you anything to arrive there. I could go to high school and I just walked in the front door every day and there were no questions asked. But suddenly when I turned 18 years old and it was time to graduate from grade 12 and go to grade 13, I was expected to pay $20,000 a year for that transition, despite staying at a public school in the Commonwealth. And so that right to a public education arbitrarily expires once we reach college. And I think it's really important that we question and we're critical about why we've allowed that right to arbitrarily expire. because it has real material consequences for folks. Myself, I come to this work also because it is personal for me. After graduating from UMass Amherst, just 4 years of a public education, have $31,750 in student debt that I have to pay back. $31,750. And that is not a unique figure at all, because the average student who graduates with debt has $32,700. So I'm right on par with the average for graduates of public institutions, which is absolutely crazy that this is something that we allow. Every semester that I was on campus at UMass Amherst, I knew a student who had to drop out because the cost was unaffordable. I knew students every semester who would sleep through meals because they were not able to afford a meal plan in addition to all of the other costs of going to school. Students who all of the time are making decisions between housing, between textbooks, the jobs that they're able to work, all in order to be financing their education. And this is completely unacceptable. The numbers speak for themselves. The student debt crisis is a crisis. Nationally, the student debt figure is a towering $1.6 trillion. This affects 44 million Americans, and this figure has doubled since 2003. Doubled since 2003. That's crazy. And we have to ask, why over the last 2 decades have we started to graduate more and more Americans into higher and higher debt burdens? And the answer is just austerity. That the government has decided they don't want public funds going to public education anymore, and the cost has been privatized and shift on to us as students, as families, as people trying to cash in on our right to a public education. And these have completely unequally felt burdens, because student debt, like all other crises, land along the existing fault lines of social inequalities. So this means that our lowest income students, that Black families, Latinx families, Indigenous students graduate with more debt than their higher income and their white peers. Women have greater amounts of student debt and more difficult times paying it off because of the wage gap. My siblings in the queer and trans community have some of the highest rates of housing and food insecurity while attending college. So all of this to say that student debt is a crisis that is, not just about education access, but it's about economic justice. It's about racial justice. It's about queer justice. And it's important as we're thinking about, these national contexts, and everyone is, it seems like having a national conversation right now about student debt cancellation and what this crisis means, that we understand as Massachusetts that some of these effects are most acutely felt for us as a state, because since 2004, we have accelerated the amount of students in Massachusetts who are graduating with debt. So in 2004, Massachusetts had the second lowest average student debt totals of any state in the country, the second lowest average. And we now rank 10th nationally. We as a state are experiencing this national student debt crisis in some ways unlike any of the other states and the rest of the nation. And as UMass Amherst students, you have doubled the share of the cost for UMass's budget that you're paying since 2001. And that is all from state disinvestment and shifting the costs onto students. Which begets the question of, what are you going to do about it? What are you guys going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And I think today is a really important first step, of coming together. Everyone here is here today because we are impacted by this crisis and we care to do something. We care to talk to one another and brainstorm solutions to ask these questions of, what can we do? Who in our networks can we pull in to make a difference about some of these things? And we know that when we work together, we can see results. Just specifically on this issue, we see that the Biden administration on day one of his presidency passed a moratorium on student loan payments. So this means that folks with student debt do not have to make a payment to their student debts until September. That's incredible. The president has recognized the real problem that this has on families across the nation. And the only reason he's recognized that problem is because people like ourselves have been standing up for the last couple of years and saying, this is absolutely unacceptable. Enough is enough. But the same authority that the president used to pause payments, is not the same as using that to completely relieve us of our debt burdens. So this is going to require more advocacy from us to say it's not enough just to pause payments. We need to absolutely cancel the need to pay back student debt. We need to make the phrase student loans obsolete. The fact that we have this idea that you have to take out loans for your education, that being a student entails going into debt, is absolutely ludicrous. And it's a manufactured problem. Why is it a manufactured problem? So my mom went to UMass Boston. Well, I guess you could say we're a UMass family. She graduated. She was the first in her family, as far wide as you extend in her family, the first person to go to college. And she did that from poverty. Her family was extremely working class. And she also did that while raising my brother. So she was a working class, single mother, first generation college student who was able to go to UMass Boston and graduate with a nursing degree because at that time in the 90s, the state made a commitment to students. There was an investment in people like my mom to be able to go to college and get an education. But if my mom was in this situation right now of going to school, I'm not sure that she would have enrolled in the first place. She might not have had that opportunity. Or if she did, she might have been like any one of my friends over the course of my time at UMass who've had to drop out because the cost burden was exceptionally high. And this shift just over the course of our lifetimes is because of legislative decisions. And it's incumbent upon us as constituents to stand up and contact our legislators and say, this is absolutely unacceptable. Representative Higgins, can I ask you a question? How many of your colleagues have to hear from constituents every day about these burdens?
I mean, all of them. So I think we were really thrilled. I think we've got 25 co-sponsors right now, but it's not just about getting co-sponsors, right? It's creating that sense of urgency that we have to do it this session, that we cannot wait. Because it's one thing to wipe out student loan debt for those of us, the million residents who have $33 billion in student loan debt. We've got to also bring down the cost of public higher ed so that we're not kind of creating this new burden continually every year. So we've got to do them together.
How much of an impact can the students in this room have on their legislators, Rep. Higgins?
So much. You need to talk to your legislators. You would be surprised at like a dozen emails. We're like, oh, what's up? Like, hey, we got to pay attention to this issue. We don't hear from constituents that much. You would be surprised. But it has to be all across the state. And that's why I love coming to talk to you Mass Amherst students, because I saw it in the chat, you are all over the state. You're on the Cape, you're in Western Mass, you're in the Boston area, right? Like you are touching all across the state, and you have friends who are in all 200 districts. So you need to keep that pressure on, and it can't just be once a year. Like it needs to be regular communication.
So that is a call to action that Representative Higgins just gave to all of you. You have an extensive network, both on campus and from your lives before you arrived at UMass Amherst, right? You have a bunch of people in your network at school who are dispersed all over the state. You have friends, you have family, right, who are connected to you in one way or another, who are impacted by this issue as well. It's about relational organizing. It's about leaning into the people in your life and talking with them about their debt experiences as well, because this is something that is impacting so many people, right? 44 million Americans are burdened with debt. And I think that number obscures the amount of people who are actually burdened by this, right? Because there's 44 million people who hold student debt, but there's also families who are helping people to pay that debt off, right? There's people who like partners who their lives are impacted by their partner's student debt. There are children who are not able to be born because families can't, enter family planning because of the financial burdens of debt, right? These extend way beyond just the debt holders. And so you all have these networks that you can lean into and organize and lobby your legislators. 12 emails, Representative Higgins said, 12 emails on an issue gets someone's attention. How manageable do you think that is to contact 12 people in your life and ask them to reach out about this and have sustained contact on this issue, right? This needs to be a priority this session because the state legislature is the manufacturer of this problem. We wouldn't have to rely on debt financing. We wouldn't have to take out all of these loans or work so many jobs or skip our meals to attend classes if there was robust public financing for public education. This is the state legislature's problem. And we have enough people in our lives that we can talk to and convince to be a part of the solution with us. And today is the first step of that. This is the call to action to, after today, reach out to these networks and pull them into events just like this. Town halls in districts, phone banking to legislators, phone banking neighbors and friends and asking them about their student debt and what they plan to do about it as well. This session, I think that we can win the Debt Free Future Act. This session, I think we might be able to win an endowment tax. But all of that depends on how much we're willing to fight for it. How much are you guys willing to fight for it? Unmute yourselves. How much are you guys willing to fight for it?
Ready with my born, okay?
Hell yeah, Isabel.
I'm ready. Abolish it all.
Let's do it.
Yes, let's go.
And can I just say one thing? Because I've been doing phone banking, like even lead the leader training for the phone banking for the members. So we could do, like I said on the chat, we could do for our own members, do our phone banking. And we have the platform. All we gotta do is add money to it, and we could just do phone banking.
Hell yeah.
To help out.
Isabel is a superstar phenom organizer at UMass Boston. And she could tell you how exciting and easy it is to pull a group of folks together and start making phone calls. It really is, but it starts with making that ask. 12 people, that is my ask of you all today leaving this event, is to write down the names of 12 people that you're going to ask to be a part of this with you. Can everyone do that? Can you use the like emoji feature or like your hand or something? 12 people after today that you're going to reach out and bring into this. Oh, Siddhanta has 2 thumbs, so he's reaching out to 24 people. Word. Thank you all so much. One of the like most amazing parts of my job is working with students because it is the energy and the possibility that you all bring to this work that makes me sign into Zoom every day to try to organize digitally with you all. And we are going to do this. We are going to do this. I want you to say that mantra over and over to yourselves, because at times it can feel really demoralizing, especially when we have to be making these student debt payments, right? Or working these other jobs, and for you all continuing to finance going to school. But we are going to do this.
And I just want to add that Phenom has been leading the way with, we just passed the Student Loan Borrower Bill of Rights. We've been working on that for 6 years. It passed on the last day of session at 4 a.m. That was because of student voices. That wouldn't have happened if students all across the state didn't call, email their legislators and the committee chairs, because we needed to get that bill out. And that's going to add some basic protections, right? It's not groundbreaking, but it gives the Attorney General's office some tools to go after bad student loan servicers. And it creates a student loan ombudsman so that any of us who are having trouble with our student loans, I've had trouble with my student loans, we can go to one person in the state and know that they're going to listen to our story and see, is there a pattern, and we can go after these folks because they shouldn't be making a profit off of our education.
Absolutely. More wins are the future. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be here with you all today. I'm just like looking at all of your faces on gallery view right now and know that this is an engaged group of people who is going to really help us pave the way forward to winning back our basic rights to an education in the Commonwealth. And you should all feel really proud of yourselves for showing up here today and really excited for what the future holds.
Thank you so much, Timmy. You all heard his call to action. Please write down those 12 names, but don't only just write them down. Reach out to them. And one thing that you can do right now is send them this link for SEPA Advocacy Week registration. The phone calling, the letter writing, those are part of the events that we are holding this week. We're having a town hall on Monday. Show up and use your voice, use your power as constituents to keep pushing forward legislation for the right for free higher education. And thank you, Representative Higgins, for coming. It's been a pleasure. Yes, and thank you, Timmy, for speaking. It's great to have you here. Our next speaker is going to be Timothy Scalona. He is your student trustee representative. He obtained his bachelor's degree in political science and also one in policy, journalism, and storytelling, and a Spanish minor from UMass. He's currently pursuing a master's at UMass for public policy and was a co-founder of FLIP, the first generation low-income partnership at UMass. And he was also involved in SEPA during his student days. So welcome, Timothy, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for that kind introduction, and I'm really happy to be here as well. Yes, I am a student in the public policy program right now. I am the current student trustee from the Amherst campus, but I more so like to refer to myself as an activist or an organizer. That's where I feel most real change can come from, is bottom up. And I feel like given the space we're in and the student communities and communities we're a part of, we can truly make change using those mechanisms. I guess as the cost of higher education has become increasingly unaffordable and tuition continues to rise every year, low-income students, as many have said, have been priced out. The systemic defunding of higher education over the past few decades has forced students to take on thousands of debt for the mere chance to climb the social ladder, even though the opportunity to get to a higher socioeconomic class is hidden behind this debt barrier. And it's like you're being told the only ticket out of poverty or out of living paycheck to paycheck is to get an education that also puts you in a very similar situation. And it's intentional. It's so intentional. It's a budget, in my view, is a moral document, and it details our government's priorities and their values. And the limited support for sufficient higher education funding on the federal and state level both reflects this as a policy failure and makes it intentional, in my opinion. Even at major public universities such as UMass, the outrageous costs increasingly serve predominantly the upper middle class and affluent students, and this reproduces generational privilege. The 2014 New York Times study on the UMass system that shows that 46% of students come from the top 20%, while 6% of students come from the bottom 20%, shows the existing consequences of this funding failure. And very personally, I'm a low-income and first-generation college student myself, and I felt this, and I still continue to feel it at UMass. And I've never told this story as well. And Timmy, your family story reminded me of my own, because my mother, who was fighting as a student at UMass Lowell when my family was experiencing housing insecurity to get her bachelor's degree and then her master's degree, had to drop out in her last semester because she could no longer afford to go. And because of that, because of the debt she accrued in 2012, she was not able to get her bachelor's nor her master's, even though she was 2 classes away from that. And what could have saved my family from poverty instead pushed us further into it. And she is now not able to go back because there's no way for her to pay off the massive, thousands of dollars in debt that she accrued. So this funding issue then, well, for me, in the way that I experience it, it creates inequities in the campuses themselves. While I am the student trustee right now, I still very closely understand the fear of rising debt and the threat of being forced to drop out of college. I actually worked with a student before I came to UMass at UMass Lowell, who also had to drop out of college because while we were both living in homeless shelters, because she couldn't afford it, and she has not been able to go back, and it's been 5 years now. So these like budgetary choices have real consequences for the students that are excluded, the students that have to drop out, and the ones that are forced on our campuses to skip meals to pay their bills, and for those that have to endure a campus culture that has normalized privilege as well, and then gets more and more exclusive as universities compete to rise in the rankings. More specifically, I think as we've seen recently, this defunding of higher education has also resulted in the COVID crisis that we've seen at UMass, because a culture of fiscal conservatism on the Board of Trustees specifically, and the incessant need to close a budget deficit, coupled with the lack of state funding, then incentivize the UMass system to bring as many students back as possible, that now has caused this massive crisis. And this, I think, is related to this overall issue of higher ed funding in general, that if it was adequately funded by the state and federal government, then UMass wouldn't have been incentivized to bring back this 5,000 students in order to operate sufficiently, in order to close a budget deficit that the Board of Trustees imposed on the UMass Amherst administration because of the culture that they have. So I think, coming from all these, I know I listed a ton of issues that we're all organizing around from my perspective, but I think in light of this, what this really shines a light on is we not only need to continue fighting for the Cherish Act, the Debt Free Future Act as well, but also for a democratized Board of Trustees in particular that can actually make choices that support students and workers and are actually benefit and reflect their interests in what the institution is, while also trying to promote economic and racial diversity at the UMass system through these programs as well, because they have real consequences. And I think we can do this through organizing. And I hope, as Timmy and everyone's calls to actions on this call have said, I am very hopeful for what we can do. And despite all of the problems, I think the more people that are brought into this movement and shine a light on these problems and share their stories to make change, we can make this a real reality of free higher education and completely canceled student debt. So I thank you for having me, and I am glad to be here with you in this movement.
Thank you so much for speaking. Thank you for sharing your story. And yes, thank you for everyone for being here. Again, just the importance of using our voice and using our power to fight for free higher education. So thank you for speaking. Our next speaker is Sonia Epstein. They are the current SGA president. They're also a task force leader of the Racial Justice Coalition at UMass, as well as involved in the Restorative Justice Campaign at SEPA. They're pursuing a degree in social thought and political economy with minors in sociology and political science, as well as a certificate in criminology. So thank you for being here, Sonia.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for doing that introduction. You did it way better than I could have, because I always forget to say something. But it's great to see you all. As Gil mentioned, my name is Sonia. My pronouns are they, them. And yeah, I'm just honored to be here and get to speak with you all around this utterly devastating crisis and how we can fight against it. I want to start off with a little bit of background about myself. I am an immigrant from Belarus. For those of you who don't know, that is a country in Eastern Europe. It's right next to Russia. It used to be part of the Soviet Union. So my parents went to college in the Soviet Union and then in Belarus a bit while getting their PhDs. And I just texted them to confirm this, but they went to college not only for free, but they got stipends. And so now sitting here accruing a tremendous amount of student debt and having to navigate this system as the first person in my family to go to college in the US, it's incredibly stressful and difficult. This is not something we ever expected. You know, it's kind of the classic American dream story where we came here and my parents left everything they knew to build a better life for me and my sister. And now with all of this student debt building, that seems further and further away every day. I've had so many friends have to take on countless hours of work to try and fight their student loans to stay in school. I've had friends who have to choose between either staying in school or being able to pay rent, either buy groceries or pay rent because of their student debt, because of how many hours of work they have to put into everything. They fall behind on their schoolwork. And it's these choices that we don't have to be making. This is all a policy decision that has been forced upon all of us. This isn't a natural thing. My parents got paid to go to school. We should be getting paid to pursue the things that we love and care about. We're all studying things, hopefully, that mean a lot to us and that we're passionate about. And in order to pursue that, we're being forced into thousands and thousands of dollars of debt. I know a few other folks have mentioned this, but debt cancellation and higher state funding is a social justice issue. It's a racial justice issue, economic justice issue. And by making sure that everyone can go to school for free and continue that education, that allows everyone to be able to pursue the things that they love and succeed and fulfill that American dream that we read thousands and thousands of stories about and hear about endlessly. And these disproportionate effects are not a given. And so I think kind of recognizing our power to make that happen is what's so crucial. I think SEPA is such an amazing organization. That's when I was, coming into UMass feeling completely lost. I, tried out for mock trial, didn't get in, tried out for a bunch of improv groups, didn't get in. And then I saw a group standing up for racial justice, for justice on campus, and realized this is what's important. This is how to make a change. And I don't have to be just accepting my first semester here, recognizing how fucked up UMass is, honestly, that this isn't a given, that we can all be fighting against this. And it's been an interesting journey since then, with fighting for more state funding, fighting against tuition raises, fighting for debt cancellation. And it gets really hard. Thousands of or not thousands, that's an overestimation, but tens, dozens probably, of administrators and legislators, to me personally, have been extremely dismissive, extremely rude. I've had Swami explain the budget process to me, I think 3 separate times this semester. You go to a legislator and you advocate to them and they say, well, how are you going to pay for it? This isn't possible. Like, yeah, this sounds great, we can't do it. But it's not a lack of funding. It's not a lack of a way to make that happen. Representative Higgins outlined how we can make this happen. There's bills already on the table to make this happen. Exactly. We know how they're going to pay for it. It's so possible. It's just a lack of willpower. And the way we fight against that is by making our voices heard, by annoying the hell out of these legislators. You write letters to them, you go to their office, you make sure that your friends are doing the same. Those 12 people that Timmy had, you write down, get them to participate in the rest of SEPA's Advocacy Week. And you'll see that the power of your stories and your voices is what pushes them to recognize that this is possible and that they need to do this. There can't be any more excuses. I was an intern at the State House a couple summers ago, and I saw it's incredibly slow moving and frustrating to be there. I was there when they were really delayed in their budget process, and every day I'd come in and I'd say, what's going on? Like, am I going to be able to go to UMass again? Is there going to be a tuition raise? Are they going to cut a bunch of services at UMass because of a forced tuition freeze, but without giving us the proper funding? And it's a question that came up every day. And, I think it's important for them to see how urgent this is and how this impacts every single one of our lives. And so fighting for all of these things is tiring and it's frustrating, so incredibly frustrating. But, there's 16 of us right here fighting for all of this. And all of us know so many more people. There's 23,000 undergrads at UMass. And if all of us are able to push for this, think about not even just UMass Amherst, but the rest of the UMasses, the rest of Massachusetts. There's so many people that can advocate for this and push for this, where legislators will no longer have an excuse, where administrators at UMass will see that they need to be prioritizing this more and fighting for this. They have been pushed over by the government for so long, and they let Charlie Baker come and speak at commencement a couple years ago when he keeps cutting funding, not him personally, but his budget consistently underfunds UMass. And they're like, okay, great, come speak here. We need to have them be pushing for this too. It's extremely unfair that all of this burden, we're dealing with the burden of classes, of work, of a pandemic, of paying our loans, and now we also have to fight for our basic human rights. Some of that should be put on the administrators. I was talking to an administrator about grants that they allowed students to have recently because they weren't allowing students to go to work, which, we can get into that another time. But the most they were going to offer was $300 because they calculated that students are probably working 10 hours a week. Most students are working more than that. And the students that are working more than that are the ones who need this money the most. So we were able to get the maximum raise to $600, which is really exciting. But a quote that's stuck in my head from that meeting is him saying, well, students shouldn't be working more than 20 hours a week anyways. We're forced to work more than 20 hours a week a lot of the time. And it's because of the circumstances that have been placed onto us. But again, like I said before, none of these things are a given. And with all of our power that we have, the power of our voices, the power of our stories, we can win this, and we can go to school for free and pursue the things we love without having to sacrifice other things. So you're all incredibly powerful, and I hope you never forget that. Go advocate to your state representatives, go advocate to President Biden, go advocate to your SGA reps. We can always use more people advocating to us. I'm pushing administrators to do the right thing, but the more student testimony I can bring to the table around that, the better. And continue making sure that the people who represent your wants and needs are the ones being elected. So thank you all for having me here, and I'm excited to be in this fight alongside you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. That was really some valuable words and messages. I mean, one message that's consistently coming up is, us as students, we shouldn't be making those sacrifices for our education. We shouldn't have to work so many hours a week just so that we can pay for our education. So thank you, Sonia. And again, the point, reach out to your local legislators, but also reach out to your UMass legislators, reach out to your SGA representatives. I think that's really important as well. So thank you, Sonia. Our next speaker is Kaina Damistor from the UMass Black Student Union. They're currently a senior psychology major and holding the position of a program director at the Black Student Union. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I can start with just speaking about my personal experience. I'm a first-generation college student, so student debt and student loan wasn't something that I knew about. In high school, they just told you to, go to college. You have to go to college. It'll give you a better future, and apply for FAFSA. And there wasn't any other really information provided after that. I actually chose to go to community college. Well, I don't think it was really a choice. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to have that many student loans. So I deferred for 2 years and went to community college. And it honestly was an experience. I enjoyed it. I did like it, but I think I've seen a lot of people that went to universities while I was in community college that came back after a semester because they couldn't afford their loans. They couldn't afford to be there for the next semester. And there's nothing like that feeling of being in the middle of the semester and getting that email or that phone call saying that you can't pick your classes for next semester because you still have an outstanding balance. And that is nerve-wracking. Personally, just the thought of student loans gives me so much anxiety because I am graduating and I know I only have about 6 months till I have to start paying. And there's just, I don't know which way to go and what to do as of right now. I know in my group of friends, in my close circle, it's a constant conversation that we have. And some of us feel as if it's just another bill. They are sort of like just discouraged by it. They don't think anything's really going to change. And so to them, it's just something they have to pay. And it's like a rite of passage in some way. Some of us just chose not to go to college because they didn't want to have to deal with it. They are scared. Some of us dropped out because they can't afford it. And I've known many students who are simply, they want to be in school, they want to go to college, but their way of life is just not, it's not congruent with that. I want to talk about how BIPOC students usually have more debt than their counterparts because of the racial wealth gap. Not only do we take out more loans, not only do we own more loans, but we also get paid less when we do enter the workforce. And so it's just a constant battle. And as part of BSU, we try and advocate and have conversations with our with students just to encourage them to reach out to their state representatives and know who you're voting for. We talk about, I think, after our generation, we're getting a lot more into politics earlier on because we've realized how much it affects us. And so we constantly advocate for them to talk to their local representatives because local races really truly do matter and they can have a big impact in the national race. So we try to tell them to call your representatives, make sure that when they're going there, when they're talking on your behalf, they're advocating on your behalf, make sure they're actually advocating for the things that matter to you. And yeah, I echo what everyone said, and this is great work that we're doing, and I hope we continue to do that. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Kaina. Thank you for sharing your story. And yes, like you and so many others have mentioned, like student debt isn't just the student debt issue, it's a racial justice issue, it's an economic justice issue. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Our next speaker is also from the Black Student Union at UMass. She's in their third year studying communication and journalism as a double major with a concentration in sports journalism. And she's currently doing graphic design and social media for the BSU. So thank you for being here. Tamira Powell.
Hi, I'm Tamira. So my experience with student debt is kind of interesting. Both my parents, they went to and got their degrees in like higher ed. So my dad went and got, I think, his Juris Doctorate. So he's still paying off student loan debts to this day, and he hasn't been to school since 2000. That's 20 years of student loan debt, and I have two siblings, as well as myself, and it was hard for us to even get approved for loans in the first place. So like just having to find out, or just having for me to have to work for myself, as well as like trying to help my mom when she falls short on bills sometimes. It's an ongoing thing. It's not just something like my parents, they both have very good jobs. They bring in a lot of money, but they don't see it. They don't see it because it's taken by the IRS. It's taken by what is it called? Levying on their paychecks. And it's just terrible because they've already put so much work and they've put in so much money already for even before the 20 years when they were actually in school, because they were paying when they were in school and they were working and doing their work study too. And it's just like, when do we say enough is enough and just finally forgive all of these debts? Because I'm gonna have to, I couldn't even find out where to find my personal like debts that I've accumulated over the past years because it's so difficult to find on Spire. It's like almost hidden on Spire. And I found out literally recently how much I owe. That's 50,000 already, and this is my third year. I don't even want to contemplate like what the interest on that might be, or what, because that's just the loans that I've had with federal. So it's really hard to not want to have this immediate relief right now, because you have to anticipate what's going on in or where you might be in like 20 years. You might still be paying off this debt, and you have to center your life around that. And we have a pandemic. Like, we never expected this to happen. There's funds that we need to be able to use. There's like emergencies that are always around. Children, families, providing for other people, it costs money. And it's not just something that we kind of like we can ignore. It's not something that we can ignore. We have to do something about it now. So it's really, I really feel like it's such a privilege to be able to sit around and like talk about it when we're also like so actively being affected by it every single day, with like every little thing going on. Like, we have like I'm listening to everybody talk. We have like classes, and there's stress of everything. So it's really important that I'm so glad that we're here doing this.
Thank you, Tamira. I agree. I'm so glad that we're all here and that we're all fighting for the right to have an affordable and free higher education. So thank you for being here. And thank you for all of our speakers. That's it for our speakers portion. Thank you for everyone who's sharing their stories and sharing their thoughts with us. And I'm going to hand it off to Hasini, who's going to begin our training portion of today's event. So thank you all again.
Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Woo!